Week 2 was one for the ages. Phenomenal storylines all over the place. Chaos in the AFC North. The Vikings on the rise. Detroit falling apart. Whole lot of things to talk about. But first and foremost, we must address the seeming best team in football. The New Orleans Saints, who for the second week in a row have gone out and lit up the opposing defense. But this week, they weren't playing the lowly Carolina Panthers. They were playing the touted Dallas Cowboys. And I've seen a ton of hot takes, a ton of overreactions to this game, so let me be the first one to pump the brakes. No, the Saints are not that good. This was a game which came together, a combination of perfect circumstances which allowed New Orleans to flatten Dallas. Dallas does not have a good run defense. We know that. We know historically, at least in the McCarthy era, they are prone to getting lit up every now and again throughout the regular season, particularly by good teams. And the Saints O-line, which was very lowly thought of by both of us at points in time, has greatly improved in the offseason. Trevor Penning, in particular, deserves some praise. He both stonewalled Micah Parsons in the passing attack and was a great run blocker in this matchup. All those things came together to allow the Saints to bulldoze over Dallas. Offensively, the Cowboys didn't look good either, but Dak Prescott's going to be Dak Prescott. You can't give a man $60 million and expect his arm to hold up perfectly every week. I think calling the Saints the best team in football may have been a bit of an overstatement, maybe a bit of an overreaction. I think they're better than I thought they were. Dennis Allen can hold off on ordering his Chinese dictionary, but two great performances in the first 2 weeks of the season really do not move me all that much, particularly against the two teams they played.
Calling the Saints the best team in football is a step too far because it's not like we have a few years of success we can rely on where we know we're going to see this every week like we could with a Chiefs team where we know they're dominant and they're just kind of reasserting what we already know. But this Saints team, they are for real. It was easy to kind of dismiss their week 1 success because they were just playing the Panthers, who may be the worst team in football outside of the Giants. But when you do it in week 2 against the Cowboys and dominate in the same exact fashion, 4 interceptions over 2 games, 7 sacks over 2 games, you allowed just 29 points over 2 games. I don't know what Dennis Allen did in the offseason to make this defense that much better, but they are operating at a high level. They're not making mistakes. Their DBs are flying around the field and making tackles in the backfield, and all around, they're playing as like one of the best defenses in the NFL. And on the offensive side of the ball, I said Derek Carr was overhated by many heading into the season. I think his stat line from last year and the narrative that was surrounding their backup quarterback in Jameis Winston kind of was a little overblown and made people think Derek Carr was worse than he is, but they looked like the greatest show on turf. They averaged 5 yards a carry. Rashid, how do you pronounce his last name?
Rashid Shaheed.
Proving to be one of the best deep threats in the NFL. Chris Olave is doing everything you ask a number 1 receiver to do.
Except catching a lot of balls. He's not really doing that. My fantasy team can attest. Let's pump the brakes on that talk real quick.
I'm sorry he's not, supporting your fantasy team in your franchise endeavors.
I get where you're going. They've played very well. I just think the defenses they have played are not exactly ones we bang the drum and say, oh, look, they're so dominant, they're so great. Sure, they scored 47 points, ton of touchdowns. That was not an elite passing attack we saw against the Cowboys. That was a passing attack which picked its spots and capitalized on them thanks to a well-established run game. A run game which had a very easy time because, again, they are playing the Dallas Cowboys, a team which cannot stop the run. The memo is out on this unit. Mozzie Smith didn't get any better this offseason. The interior of that D-line didn't get any better this offseason. Micah Parsons is not a good enough defensive player at stopping the run, at fighting off double teams to effectively control one side of the field. This Cowboys team is susceptible to getting road grade. That is the only way teams are going to be able to effectively beat them this year. It's hard to pass on them if you don't set it up first. It's a good passing defense, which is going to be completely overshadowed by their inability to tackle someone behind the line of scrimmage.
Well, the 2 caveats I would just place from the Saints on an offensive perspective is, like you just said, they played a team that's not known for their run defense, has not exactly improved all that much from what we saw, especially against the Saints, and they played the Panthers defense in week 1. So even though Derek Carr is completing 76% of his passes, has 5 touchdowns, 142 quarterback rating, we'll learn a lot more when they play a defense that is better at stopping the run, and they play an offense that's actually able to threaten their defense and forces the game into more of a shootout. Because what, Derek Carr attempted 16 passes this past weekend?
Didn't throw it more than 20 times, which is not what you would expect from a game which had 47 points scored in it.
But I will say, last thing on the Saints is their defense. They made a Cowboys offense look stupid after the Cowboys offense made one of the best defenses in the NFL in the Browns in week 1 look like they didn't know what they were doing. So I think there's something to be said for just how good the Saints defense is.
I would disagree with you on the assessment of the Browns defense. I think the Browns defense got left on the field for long stretches of time by how quickly the Browns offense was giving the ball back to Dallas. I wouldn't say that's some indictment of the Browns defense. I think it's more so just bad complementary football. The one good thing I'll say about the Saints, are 2 good things actually. One, being 2-0 sets them up very well to win the NFC South. I don't think they're on the same level as a Lions, an Eagles, a 49ers team, even though all those teams have less wins right now than the Saints. I don't think they're a top tier in the NFC, but they have really committed to running the ball and have actually done it well. Alvin Kamara, despite his greatness and fantasy value and whatnot, has never had a 1,000-yard rushing season. I think that's going to change. They are clearly letting him use his elite contact bounce, low pad level, and all his intangibles to get going on the ground much more than they did in previous seasons, certainly much more than they did under Sean Payton. They're a run-first team, and that is going to win them their division, it's looking like. Unless the Panthers or the Falcons can really turn things around, looking pretty all right in New Orleans. Speaking of divisions, though, we look up at the AFC North, a division many are calling the best in football. And it is currently being ruled by the Pittsburgh Steelers, who are 2-0. Meanwhile, the Bengals, projected playoff team, maybe a division winner, maybe 12, 13 wins, we were saying prior to the season, 0-2. The Baltimore Ravens added Derrick Henry, supposed to be the best rushing attack ever, 0-2. And these are for 2 very different reasons, but it is worth joining together and talking about both of them because they're in the same division. Starting things off with the Ravens, they lose to the Raiders. Offense doesn't look good. Defense looks good until it doesn't, until Gardner Minshew starts leading big clutch drives and airing it out a little bit more because the pass rush doesn't get to him. And Justin Tucker misses a 50-yard kick. Those things come together and take a Ravens team who we thought, what was the projection? A 9.5-point line we thought was going to be worse than that. We thought the Raiders were going to get blown out. You take that.
I didn't think the Raiders were going to get blown out.
You didn't think they were going to get blown out?
I thought the Ravens were going to win relatively comfortably, but...
A comfortable win, but not a blowout.
I didn't think we were going to watch a game where it's 30-10 in the first half. And a lot of people
To be fair, the Ravens can't really score 30 points in the first half because of how much they run the ball.
Well, they didn't run the ball enough. I mean, some people may act like the sky is falling when the Ravens lose to the Raiders because the media has put out there that the Raiders are some horrible team and that they're not going to win more than 5 games this season. But they have Max Crosby on defense, one of the best defensive players in football, Christian Wilkins, and on offense, while Gardner Minshew may not be a top 15 quarterback in the NFL, he certainly is more than capable of being a top 20 quarterback in the NFL and winning you close football games if the other team is making mistakes and not playing the best football like the Ravens were. They capitalized on the Ravens making mistakes, inaccurate passes, maybe not running the ball as much as they should. And overall, what to me looked like a discombobulated offense when you have Devontae Adams, Brock Bowers, Jacoby Myers, Michael Mayer backing up Brock Bowers. You have an offense that can push the ball down the field and make plays. It's not like this offense has no talent, and people that are going to use this to trash the Ravens up and down, I think, are a little crazy.
Well, the Ravens fans would disagree with you because they're calling for the firing of John Harbaugh and the execution of both the coordinators, so they might push back on that. Running the ball, you see Derrick Henry, you look at the 84 yards on 14 carries. You look at that and say, okay, well, they're trying to run it more. It's a little bit off. Something's not quite right. I personally think it's because they're trying to use Henry too much out of the shotgun. You look at these great contact-generating running backs like a Derrick Henry, an Adrian Peterson, and Eric Dickerson. These guys are best out of the I formation. Maybe you stick a fullback in front of them and let him hit the hole first, but they need a head of steam to build up and really tear through that line of scrimmage. If they're starting off in the backfield flat-footed, going sideways to get the handoff, and then going forward, they're not going to be that effective. I understand Lamar likes going out of the shotgun, is limited when he goes under center, but you've got to either adjust your play style or you've got to ask yourself, why did we bring in Derrick Henry? You need to cater your offense somewhat to him. If you want him to have those long carries, those massive 150-yard games, which I think he's still capable of having. He was having those games occasionally behind a terrible Titans line last year. He can do it in Baltimore. But if you want to see that out of Henry, you've just got to go under center. And I don't think the Ravens are willing to do that. Maybe that'll change over the course of the year. Maybe the volume of under center snaps will go up, but right now, that is just not looking good to me.
Well, the play calling just doesn't make that much sense, much like in the Chiefs game. They ran the ball 27 times, which isn't a small amount, but when you're averaging over 5.5 yards a carry between Derrick Henry, Lamar Jackson, and Justice Hill, why are you throwing the ball 34 times, especially when they were winning a majority of the game? That doesn't make much sense, and it looked and felt better than week 1 did against the Chiefs as far as working Derrick Henry into the game along with Lamar Jackson. And I think it'll get better as the season progresses. Like you said, it just feels off, discombobulated, disjointed, where they're still trying to figure out how to use them in the same offense. And playing the Cowboys, Bills, Bengals over the next 3 weeks, I think that's going to be a big test for
Playing
them.
the Cowboys is not going to be a test on the ground. Let's pump the brakes on that. We just talked about how terrible their run defense is. I think they'll bounce back against the Cowboys. So they don't have 150-plus rushing yards as a team against the Cowboys. Then we start to panic a little bit.
I would pick them to beat the Cowboys right now. I'd pick the Bills to beat them. And I think I would pick the Ravens to beat the Bengals still. But 5 games into the season, we could find this team 2-3 or 1-4, depending on how these next 3 games go, which none of us expected for the Ravens heading into the season.
Speaking of unexpected going into the season, you mentioned the Bengals. They're 0-2. I think we saw this coming a little bit more in the back of our minds. Not really because we think the Bengals are a bad team, it's just because they always seem to start slow. This week, I'll throw them a bone here. They looked much better against the Chiefs than they did against the Patriots. Played 2 close games, lost 2 close games. We're not talking about the officiating. One way or the other, we're not talking about it. You're not getting on your soapbox talking about how dumb the fans are. I'm not getting on mine talking about how the refs stink. We're not doing that this week. But the passing attack, still not quite there. The running game, better than week 1, still not good. I don't think this Bengals team is ever going to be functional on the ground until they massively overhaul the interior of their offensive line, which they keep trying to do and keep failing at. Zach Moss might not be a bad running back, but he's not going to be able to do anything running downhill into Chris Jones 2 yards deep in the backfield every play. It's just not going to happen. Can they bounce back from this? Yes. Their defense played very well, all things considered. Granted, they're going up against a diminished Chiefs team who is missing some of their key players in Isaiah Pacheco, Hollywood Brown, now out for the year, Travis Kelce, old, Xavier Worthy, only capable of running fast in a straight line per sources, and which really leaves you with a receiver. Look, you smile at me for saying that. The Bengals defense did a very good job of defending Xavier Worthy. They didn't let him do the gadget stuff. They did not have any blown coverages on him. They kept one eye safety on him most of the game. They knew what they were doing. This is a limited offense with the exception of Rice right now. And maybe I'm overblowing that a little bit. Maybe I'm seeing more of the Bengals defense than I am seeing of the Chiefs offensive limitations. But I just don't see this team being as bad as they are.
Well, it's also a Bengals team that seems to be the only team that can ever truly play the Chiefs that close. So
the Bills would like a word with you. Just because they don't win any of the games doesn't mean they don't play them close every time.
Well, they're the only team that has beaten them a few times and come out on the other end, unlike the Bills.
Hey, Josh Allen 3-0 in the regular season. Look, we could have this conversation now. I don't mean to cut you off, but you and I both know that in terms of responsibility for beating the Chiefs in that playoff game, Patrick Mahomes beat himself with that interception in overtime. This is not some crowning achievement of the Bengals dynasty, knocking the Chiefs off in the playoffs once and losing the Super Bowl. It's not them, it was them.
That's besides the point. At the end of the day, the sky is not falling for the Bengals. Week 1 was really rough, but that was made a whole lot better by the fact that the Ravens are also starting 0-2. So from them, they're starting in the same place. And the rest of the season, you're going to be going toe-to-toe for them now. So week 1 hurt. Week 2, the fans are going to complain about the refs. I'm not going to drone on and on about that.
How would you don't drone at all about it?
The only thing I will say...
No. Come on now. I said we weren't saying it. Just leave it alone.
If you had to say something, I get to say something small.
I said me saying something was me saying we're not talking about it.
Fans overblow it because it is a nationally televised game every single week, and if you watch every game, you'd have much different feelings. That is the only thing I'm going to say about that.
The Chiefs are favored by the Roger Goodell made the call.
I think if you're a Bengals fan, you should not be overly upset because week 1, I think we are left questioning, does Joe Burrow, is his hand injury worse than we actually thought? What is going on with Jamar Chase, who actually didn't have all that great game against the Chiefs? But for the rest of the season, I think they should be fine.
You know, the funny part is Jamar Chase could be doing what the liberal kids these days call quiet quitting. He could be showing up to his job and just phoning it in, not really accomplishing anything. He's doing the equivalent of that on an NFL field based off his first 2 weeks of performance. Wasn't no food poisoning this week, he just stunk. Now they've got to contend, though, with an uphill battle against their overlords in the AFC North, the Pittsburgh Steelers, who are not a topic of discussion today, but I will say this before we move on. You're not going to be able to play 2 effing lollipop teams to start your year every single year. And that's not going to be the remainder of your schedule. At some point, the Steelers defense is going to leave Candyland and play a real offense and get cooked a little bit, and the defense is not going to be able to respond. That is a fraudulent 2-0 we are looking at.
And at some point, Justin Fields, or if it's Russell Wilson behind center, is going to make a mistake. There's no way they continue with the efficiency they've had through the first 2 weeks.
It's not even efficiency, it's just not shooting themselves in the foot. The completion percentage is a mirage. Keeping it in the North, the NFC North. A lot of people said a lot of things about the Minnesota Vikings, the 2-0 Minnesota Vikings. Said they'd be one of the worst teams in football. Said Sam Darnold could not throw the ball. Said Brian Flores was a horrible person. Keep that same energy. That is all I want to say to the haters. Keep the same energy as Sam Darnold effortlessly skies the ball from his own end zone 60 yards. As the Vikings defense dials up exotic blitz after exotic blitz, makes one of the most talented offenses in the world look completely inept. Holds them to a mere 17 points. Could have been less if not for a goal line fumble by the Vikings. This was a one-sided affair, which the final score does not quite tell you. The Vikings are legit. So long as Sam Darnold does not keep shooting himself in the foot, the Vikings obviously does not keep shooting themselves in the foot by turning it over, this team will be phenomenal. And really, I don't know why I'm getting on Sam Darnold there. That Fred Warner interception was so much more on him being the best linebacker in football than it was on Darnold making a bad play. This is a really good team being carried by a phenomenal defense, a phenomenal front seven, and a very underrated secondary. There are few teams who are going to be able to beat the Vikings if they keep playing at their current level all year. As for the 49ers, look, sometimes a team just has your number. Brian Flores had Brock Purdy's number last year, and apparently he's got it this year. I don't think the Christian McCaffrey injury is that big of an issue. Jordan Mason is an incredibly effective running back on the ground. He might be better on the ground than Christian McCaffrey. Sure, CMC adds more in the receiving game, but Mason is a phenomenal runner of the football. You still have Debo. You still have Brandon Ayuk. You still have George Kittle. You still have Jawan Jennings, who has really stepped up as that number 2, number 3 receiver on any given Sunday. You are going to be just fine. It's just the Vikings are going to keep beating the piss out of you every single time they see him because Brian Flores can bend Kyle Shanahan and Brock Purdy over at the same time and show them why he's the best defensive mind of the 21st century, not named Bill Belichick.
Well, there will be some regression to the mean for the Vikings at some point. I highly doubt we are going to see Sam Darnold play at this level for the entirety of the season, but people will use this game or Brock Purdy haters, 49ers haters.
Are we saying 49ers haters aren't people?
They'll use this game to bash Brock Purdy, make him look bad, but he still threw for over 300 yards. Jordan Mason averaged 5 yards a carry. He threw a touchdown. His interception...
He had 2 interceptions. One was a terrible throw. One that kind of slipped off. I think they actually ruled that one a fumble, but...
He only had 1 interception on the box score, so 1 was also a fumble. And the interception was, I think, tipped 4 times before it was actually caught.
Yeah, but it got tipped by a guy who should have picked it off in Blake Cashman. It was a bad throw.
Regardless, it wasn't an overly poor game for him where the 49ers did not move the ball up and down the field. They ran the ball very effectively. They just could not get the ball in the end zone. And from the Vikings' perspective, they have now proven that they are a real team that can hang with anyone when they're beating the 49ers. In week 1, it was easy to dismiss the victory because they were playing the Giants, who are one of the worst teams in the NFL. And when you see them win 28-6, it's like, okay, we know they're a well-coached team. We know they have the best receiver in the NFL. We know they have Brian Flores, and that defense is going to be operating at a high level. But then when you go the very next week and beat a team that was in the Super Bowl last year, that is going to carry over from game to game for them. So the Vikings are a good team. I think that is clear now. Will there be some games where if the other team is pushing the ball down the field, I think Sam Darnold maybe will fall back into some old habits and press a little bit too much, but he has the whole rest of the season to continue to prove me and other people wrong.
He has been one of the 5 best quarterbacks for the first 2 weeks. Am I optimistic that will continue? Not really, but as long as he can keep being efficient, I think they'll be just fine. I doubt the Vikings are going to be in that many shootouts. Sure, the defense can leave themselves open to some underneath stuff based on how much the pressure they send with Cashman, Smith, and Pace. Maybe you can pick on them over the middle. That's what Purdy did to a certain extent with Kittle. Maybe you can get them on hitting routes outside your big tight ends, or to Deebo Samuel, who had a freaky catch with 3 guys all over him. Maybe you can exploit that and make it a high-scoring affair. I just don't see many teams lighting up the Vikings. This might be the jinx. This might be the kiss of death. They might give up 50 next week to the Texans. I don't know, but
2-6 after week 8.
2-6. Thankfully, they play the Malik Willis Packers 2 weeks from now. I am reasonably optimistic the Packers will not score more than 14 points that game. I'm feeling okay about that one. Speaking of the Packers, Tristan and I both dismissed them offensively. We thought they were going to score 0 points. We thought the Colts defense might outscore the Packers offense in week 2. We were wrong. Malik Willis did not make a ton of mistakes, handed the ball off well, kept the chains moving occasionally, and played the best game of his professional career. It still only resulted in 16 points, so that might say a lot about Malik Willis, but it was enough to beat the Colts. And that's because the Colts beat themselves, because Anthony Richardson beat the Colts. He had the worst passing game of his career, completed 50% of his balls, threw 1 touchdown and 3 interceptions. There's no two ways about it. He was why the Colts lost this game. Sure, you could have guys like Jonathan Taylor step up in a slightly larger role. You can maybe have your receivers make better plays on the ball. But at the end of the day, Richardson played terribly. In terms of the quarterbacks in the NFL, if you remove the people in their first 2 years, which really does seem to be the bottom of the barrel right now, either he or Watson were the worst passer of the football this past week. And Watson didn't even play that bad, so I might bestow that crown upon him. He's certainly in the running. Athletically speaking, ran well on the ground. I don't know what else you want me to say. If the Colts are going to be a serious team, which I don't think it's going to happen this year, the timeline doesn't work. It's essentially Richardson's rookie season. If they're going to be a serious team anytime soon, he is going to have to iron out these mistakes.
Anthony Richardson is the third reason the Colts lost this game. Did he play very poorly? Yes. Was he inaccurate? Yes, but this was a pitiful performance from this defense. When you're playing a quarterback that is very inexperienced, in the past has had some inaccuracy issues, you know the other team is going to run the ball. And what did they do? They allowed Josh Jacobs to run the ball 32 times for 151 yards, averaging 4.7 yards a carry, allowing Malik Willis to add another 41 yards on the ground. And overall, the Packers offense ran the ball 52 times for 261 yards, which also allows Malik Willis to get some very easy throws in there, build his confidence as a passer, and only needed to throw the ball, I think it was 14 times, completed 12 of those passes. So from a defensive perspective, this is a massive failure. You cannot allow a team that you know only wants to run the ball be that successful on the ground if you expect to win. And on the offensive side of the ball,
I'm going to jump in real quick. They scored 16 points. Like, you say, oh, failure, box score, whatever, 200 yards rushing allowed. They scored 16 points. If you score 16 points in an NFL game, odds are, unless your offense sells you, which the Colts did, you're going to lose that game.
On the offensive side of the ball, from a play calling perspective, it is the second biggest reason they lost the game. What do we know about Anthony Richardson? He's not an elite passer yet in his career, or the closest thing to it. Does he have some highlight throws deep down the field? Yes, he can do that. But he hasn't proven to be an elite passer of the football yet. So why, in a game where your running back is averaging over 8 yards a carry, do you only give him the ball 12 times, and your team is averaging 9.3 yards a carry? Why do you only have 18 carries, especially when the defense is keeping the score down and the other team has only scored 16 points?
Well, I got an answer for that. Jonathan Taylor came up limping in the second. Went back in, but he got hurt. So maybe you don't want to use your workhorse back if he's already dealing with an injury. that much this early in the year. Maybe you have faith that your quarterback, who you drafted with the 5th overall pick, can function at a moderately competent level against a defense which got absolutely lit up by the Bengals last week, or the Eagles last week, who, if not for Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown slipping twice, would have had 50 points scored on them. Maybe you have some faith in that guy to do something. I will begrudgingly admit the play calling was not good, but the play calling was not good because it put the ball in Anthony Richardson's hands. If your goal as a team is to keep your quarterback from passing, there's only so far you will go. There are very few teams in the NFL which can pull that off. The Ravens have not been able to pull that off so far this year, trying to get Lamar Jackson to not pass the ball. They've been forced to put the ball in his hands, and it has failed. Teams which are susceptible to turning the ball over are never going to succeed in the modern NFL. I don't know why you're covering for Richardson so hard. I'm not saying he's a bust, but this game is on him. You cannot throw 3 interceptions and then say, oh, well, look at the defense who allowed 16 points. Look at the coaching. They clearly made you throw those interceptions. He had receivers running open and could not hit them.
There's also something to be said for the fact, on a major 3rd down conversion, receiver Adonai Mitchell just drops the ball, perfectly thrown pass. On a 4th down conversion, Jonathan Taylor just drops the ball. So those are 2 big plays where Anthony Richardson made the right read and his players just dropped the ball. And like I said, this was a bad game from Anthony Richardson. Overall, it was a bad game for the Colts. But when you have a team in the Packers that was very well coached by Matt LaFleur, he came with a perfect game plan to put Malik Willis in the best position to succeed. You're going to lose when you don't execute and combat what the other team is doing. They let them run the ball for 261 yards and allowed the Packers to control the game with a backup quarterback who's also not that high level of a passer. And when they're running the ball as effectively as they were, as a team between Anthony Richardson, Jonathan Taylor, and I think it was Trey Sermon, they averaged over 9 yards a carry. Why were you not running the ball more?
Because the Packers loaded up on the box a whole lot and encouraged Richardson to pass the ball.
And they averaged 9 yards a carry.
I've seen they averaged 9 yards a carry because they barely ran the ball in obvious situations where they finally had some openings. That is as heavy of a box as I've seen outside the red zone in a long time. 8 men in the box in the modern NFL is a thing of the past. That is a 2012 Minnesota Vikings approach to stopping Adrian Peterson with Christian Ponder type of approach. They didn't run a ton because they couldn't run a ton. I assure you, if they ran it more, they would not have been averaging 8 yards a carry. It's okay to admit young quarterbacks screw up. In fact, that is probably going to be the entirety of discourse around the next 2 segments we go into. But it's okay to say your guy Richardson had a bad game.
I said he had a bad game.
And it's okay to say he was why they lost. He will have, I'm sure at some point, a bounce back. Maybe not anytime soon, but he's got to bounce back eventually. But speaking of young quarterbacks and their shortcomings, oh, Bryce Young, my sweet, sweet prince. I fell on the sword last week. I made excuses. I said, no, let's wait a week, give him another chance. We'll talk about him in week 2 if he stinks it up again. Surely he will not be as bad as he was against the Saints again. And he wasn't quite as bad. Pretty close to as bad against the Chargers. Really close. The difference was marginal, but he wasn't as bad. Panthers offense looks terrible. And a lot of the blame goes on Bryce Young. I think a lot of the blame goes on Canales. But that is just, it's not working. Whatever it is, it's not working. I'm not saying pull the plug on Bryce Young, pull the plug on this offense 2 weeks into the season. The O-line, who you spent a ton of money on, particularly the interior, just cannot stop the rush. They're forcing him back outside the pocket into the defensive ends coming around outside the edge. The blitzes are not getting picked up. Checkdowns are the only thing which seems to be available. Deontay Johnson, no separation. Adam Thielen, no separation, but that's to be expected. He's 52. Xavier Legette, no separation. Not on the field as much as you'd have hoped for someone who was basically a first-round pick. It's not good. It's really, really bad. Defensively, looked better than they did against the Saints, but that's kind of how the Chargers play football. They still got road graded, still got ran all over. Joe Alt still manhandled Jadeveon Clowney and whoever else they sent outside on the edge to deal with him. Just a rough showing. I don't know what the solution is. Something has to change in Carolina. Are we going to be talking about Bryce Young the same way we talk about Sam Darnold or Josh Rosen or someone like that.
The disappointing thing with Bryce Young is in college we saw his mind, his processing ability, his ability to make quick decisions and accurate throws. That is the reason why he was the #1 overall pick. For many, he was the consensus #1 overall pick. It's not like it was a shock when the Panthers drafted him or traded up in order to get him. And in the NFL, we just haven't seen that from him. His confidence looks completely shot. When he does push the ball downfield to the receivers, he misses by about 3 yards. It doesn't even make that much sense, and I think it's because of the system and the environment he's been placed into. Year one was one of the roughest situations I think we've had to see a rookie quarterback go through, with the lack of talent that Panthers team had, the coaching change midseason, the whatever is going on with the ownership from a top-down level was a mess. And now in year two, while they may have a little bit more talent, and you would like to think maybe a better offensive mind calling plays, he still is missing on throws he should make. The talent isn't what it would be if he was drafted to a different situation in a different team. And there's just zero execution happening from all levels, from him, play calling, blocking, interior pass rush, making plays down the field. It's just a complete disaster. And I don't think his career is completely over, but his lack of physical gifts, I think it has become clear, will prevent him ever from being in the top 5 to top 7 category. But if he went to a team like the Vikings, with Sam Darnold, who's now succeeding in a very talented offense with a very good coach and behind a good offensive line, or if he went to a team that we're going to talk about later in the Buccaneers, where Baker Mayfield is now succeeding later in his career with talented receivers, a better coach team, there'd be more potential for him. But the Panthers, it is just not it.
It really is sad we have gotten to the point where we're talking about, well, what's his next team going to look like? What's the best situation for him, which is the Carolina Panthers? And circling to something we talked about last night when planning this out, there has never been a successful quarterback in the state of North Carolina, with the exception of Cam Newton. And when you look at Cam Newton's career as the most physically dominant college quarterback we may have ever seen, I'm almost inclined to call Cam Newton's career somewhat of a failure. And it's not on his end, it's because the teams around him were just never quite good enough to match his elite level of play. We saw how high he could peak, and the Panthers just couldn't back him up, with the exception of 2015. Like, Carolina might be the worst landing spot. We give the Browns a lot of flack for having that long list of quarterbacks on the back of that guy's jersey. Panthers are in that same conversation now for me as far as quarterbacks are concerned. It is a bad spot for some reason. The dirt is poison. The red clay is not agreeing with the slingers of the football.
Unless you're one of the most physically dominant and gifted quarterbacks to ever play the position, odds are your career is not going to be successful in Carolina.
A sad state of affairs. Speaking of unsuccessful young quarterbacks, though, if you watch that Sunday night game, you've got a few takeaways about Caleb Williams. The biggest one should be, he is not very good when blitzed as of right now, and he is still trying to do the thing he did in college and extend plays with his legs, despite NFL athletes, particularly Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter, effortlessly being able to hawk him down and force sacks. In his defense, the O-line did not play well for the Bears, but I simply refuse to believe it. And this is because I haven't watched the All-22 film yet. I may come into the predictions video with a completely different mindset, but I refuse to believe the Texans were sending that much heat and a check down wasn't available. A throw within 10 yards of the line was not available for Caleb Williams. But I think he just gave up on those throws. I think he tried to move outside the pocket, extend the play with his legs, and it's just not working. Can that be coached out of him? Certainly. Will it be coached out of him in Chicago? Hard to say. They don't have good coaches up there. Their offensive coaching staff was the same cats who got Pete Carroll fired as an NFL head coach, despite him having a Super Bowl championship and generally being very well respected. These are not good offensive coaches up there. I hope he can develop. He should be able to develop, but he played terribly. As for the rest of the Bears, defense looks great. At some point, you've got to ask yourselves, are they going to have the mental breakdown the Jets defense did a few years ago, where they get sick of waiting for their quarterback to match their elite production and start getting lit up? I hope not. I hope so. I'm a Vikings fan. I'm not going to lie to you. I hope they fall apart very soon. Talent-wise, DJ Moore is going through it. I know Keenan Allen is hurt. I know Rome Odunze is hurt, but playing, it just doesn't look good. None of it looks good. The weapons are not getting capitalized on. The so-called best position for a first overall pick is being squandered. And part of that's on the coaching, part of that's on the line, but I think the biggest part is on Williams not quite being able to play at the NFL level stylistically yet.
I don't think the question is a question of ability. I think the few bright spots we have seen in week 2 and week 1, he has the ability to make reads on an NFL defense, throw the ball down the field, and the physical ability is there. I don't think that is in question. What I see when I'm watching Caleb Williams is that occasionally he seems to go off script for whatever reason. He feels like he needs to press and make plays that don't necessarily need to happen in that moment, and he'll just huck the ball down the field, or he'll throw the ball to someone he doesn't need to when there's a safer option or a better read on that play. And it was a better performance than we saw in week 1.
No, it wasn't. I am going to pound the desk and say no, it wasn't on that. He threw 3 interceptions, 1 got called back. He did not play better in week 2 than he did week 1. He played way more carelessly with the football. That was absolutely not a better performance.
Well, in week 1, he missed a whole lot more throws.
He missed a whole lot of throws in this one too. He missed people deep, and he missed a game winner. Not a game winner, but play which could have got the Bears back in the game late. The ball kisses off the ground because there was a miscommunication between him and his receiver. I'm inclined to say, based off the rest of the game, that was on him. He did not play better this week than he did last week. You're wrong about that.
He played pretty bad in both week 1 and week 2.
He played Bo Nix level bad this week. He just played poorly week 1.
Regardless, overall, my feeling on him is that sometimes his confidence seems to come and go, or sometimes he's very confident in the play call. He's very confident in the reads he needs to make based on the defense, and he makes the right throw. But then the other half of the time, his confidence goes out the window. He extends the play too long. He thinks he's Superman in cleats and then chucks the ball down the field to the defense, or gets hawked down by a Danielle Hunter or Will Anderson. So I think that will continue to improve as the season goes on. Luckily for the Bears, if he's at least able to get to average this season, the defense is so good that they'll be able to make a playoff push late. I mean, this is 2 weeks in a row where they single-handedly win the game against the Titans, albeit their offense is not great. And then against the Texans, they kept that offense in the game the entirety of the game up until the last drive. So the Bears defense is phenomenal, and if Caleb Williams is at least able to be average or even slightly below average, they can make a playoff push.
The problem with that little theory, 1, he did not throw the ball deep downfield well at all. I barely saw flash. There was maybe 1 good throw past 10 yards. And 2, I don't see a young quarterback getting better as the year goes on if A, he's got bad coaches, and B, he's got to play outdoors in Chicago. That is not a good landing spot for quarterbacks. It is really hard to play quarterback in Chicago. It's why they've never had a 4,000-yard passer, because those Chicago skies, it's called the Windy City for a reason. It's hard to throw there. That is not going to help Caleb Williams. If anything, it's going to hurt him even more. He's either going to have to develop a short game ASAP, or he's going to get picked off 5 times in a game. I am not as optimistic about that playoff push as you are. I don't see it happening this year.
I don't necessarily feel super optimistic about it, just to be clear, but I could see it happening if he's able to get to that level, and I think we'll definitely see him get better as the year goes on, because I don't think it's a question of ability. It's just a question of making the right decision all of the time or most of the time.
It's also the fact that he's going to have to play the Lions twice in the year. Maybe you get lucky and you have a Jared Goff outdoors game. They're not losing to Detroit. If you've watched the Vikings blitz packages and their defenses, that is going to eat him alive. There's not really a question of that. That offense is not going to score points. Maybe Darnold completely malfunctions. And the Packers defense, their passing defense does not appear to be that bad. Their run defense has some issues unless they really load up on the box, but they can stop the pass. And the Bears can't really run the ball well with Swift. I don't know why they paid Swift the money they did, but they have not set themselves up for success. They needed this early win. They need every early win they can because divisional play will not favor them. As for the Texans, because we have only really talked about the Bears, they missed some opportunities and Joe Mixon got hurt. There were a few passes which either sailed or were dropped, which could have resulted in points. This pretty easily could have been a 24, 27, maybe even a 30-point showing by this Texans offense against an elite defense. Maybe if Mixon gets back on the field and healthy, this game is a blowout, is more one-sided. they'll be fine going forward.
The biggest story for the Texans from this game, and I think something that is very encouraging, is that Nico Collins has proven he is clearly the number one guy in Houston. It's not Stephon Diggs. It's not Tank Dell. He is a number one receiver. He may be a top 5 receiver in the NFL with how dominant he can be at all levels of the field. And I think it is very good for the rest of the Texans season that if Stephon Diggs is fine with being the number 2 or number 3 wheel in an offense, depending on the game and whether it's Tank Dell or him each week as the number 2 guy, if he can settle in and be okay with that, this is going to be a top 3 offense in the NFL. The biggest question is just, will he start to cause a ruckus?
Yeah, better hope you keep winning, because if you don't and Stephon Diggs is only getting 3 targets a game, you are going to hear it.
Everyone was expecting, at least me and Isaiah were, for the Lions to be one of the top 5 offenses in the NFL. And from a yards perspective, we have seen that this season. Over 2 games, over 400 yards a game. And when you take a look at the box score, it doesn't really make sense how they found a way to lose to the Buccaneers. I mean, Jared Goff threw for over 300 yards. They averaged over 5 yards a carry and were dominant on the ground. So they were able to move the ball relatively easily against this Buccaneers defense, but they did not get the ball in the end zone. And I think it goes to show that over 2 weeks, they needed overtime to beat a Rams team that was dilapidated by injury throughout the course of the game. And now against a Buccaneers team that is never going to go away with Baker Mayfield and the quality of their defense, that if they continue to give teams chances, it is going to be hard for them to reach that 13-win total we had expected of them heading into the season. What I will say is, from a defensive perspective, I think they are exactly where we expected them to be prior to the season. I had Aiden Hutchinson as a defensive player of the year candidate, had 4.5 sacks against the Buccaneers, and overall, this is the best Lions defense we've seen in the better part of the last decade. So defensively, it's encouraging for the Lions. I think from an offensive perspective, the sky is not falling just because of how efficient and how many yards they were able to get, but they need to start getting the ball in the end zone, and Goff needs to stop goffing.
Aiden Hutchinson is a better man than me. He's a Michigan man, makes sense. But if I had 4.5 sacks and my team found a way to lose, I would be crashing out on the sideline at a high level. If I was bullying Tristan Wirfs, bullying whatever tight end or tackle you stuck in front of me, and we still just couldn't move the ball, I would not be a happy camper. Goff's interceptions are why the Lions didn't score. 2 big picks cost the Lions at the very least field goals and likely touchdowns. They are going to be just fine offensively if he sorts himself out. As for scoring in the red zone, they're going up against a really good interior Buccaneers defensive line, one which is kind of quietly being underrated, maybe being underrated by me going into the year, one which you are going to stroll to run in between the A or B gaps on. They'll be fine against pretty much any other team. I have no doubt whatsoever the Lions will bounce back from this. Dan Campbell's a great coach, Johnson's an amazing offensive mind, and they get free unlimited boneless wings thanks to Dan Campbell's Applebee's partnership. Having said all that, I think I need to reevaluate how I feel about the Buccaneers. I thought they'd be 1-1 at this point, maybe even 0-2 if Jaden Daniels was really that guy. They're 2-0. They are in contention with the Saints for the NFC South. Maybe they're not going away. Maybe they're still the same Bucs team from yesteryear, if not a little bit better. Granted, we saw them start out in 2023, and they kind of faded down the stretch, only to bounce back big in Week 18 and steal a playoff spot away from the Saints. They could be one of those top dogs. They keep beating teams, which they shouldn't, or at least I think they should. I'll have to start putting them near the top of the NFC in those conversations with the Lions, the 49ers, the Vikings, the Eagles. You like how I snuck the Vikings in there? With those real deal teams. Probably even above the Saints. I really don't like the Saints.
Well, it's not a shock that they beat the Commanders in Week 1, looking at the Commanders being a very young team with a new coaching staff.
You never know how good a rookie quarterback is going to be in his debut, though. Like, it's rare, but if Jaden Daniels just came out and ran for 200 yards, that wouldn't have been that outlandish, would it?
It would be pretty crazy if he ran for 200 yards.
You are a pessimist.
Anytime a player, running back, quarterback, runs for 200 yards, that would be crazy.
Clearly, you've not been studying your LSU too. I'll say one more thing about the Bucs, then let you get into it. This was their Super Bowl. This was the game they've been thinking about all offseason, going into Week 2, getting a rematch against the Lions, who sent them home in the playoffs last year. They were coming into this game pretty fired up. I don't think they'll be able to maintain quite the same level of energy going forward. Granted, Baker Mayfield, spiritual shaman, leader, maybe they can maintain that, maybe they can't. But this meant more to the Bucs than it did the Lions.
Well, the only thing that's concerning about the Bucs and why you maybe wouldn't put them with the other top teams in the NFC yet is that even though they found a way to win this game, which is the most important game, they weren't that good offensively. I mean, Baker had less than 200 passing yards. They averaged 3 yards per carry on the ground.
They gave up 4.5 sacks to one player.
Exactly. Baker Mayfield got sacked, was it 5 times?
5.
5 times. So they were not good. They got the job done when they needed to. But when they play some of these legit teams, or if they were to play the Lions again in the first round of the playoffs, they're not going to get the same mistakes every single game. So I still would have them in that 8 to maybe 10 win category. I think they're going to be probably closer to 10 than I originally did heading into the season. They're a good team, but I think with the offensive deficiencies that we saw against a good Lions defense, you can't put them in one of the top teams in the NFC yet.
I'd like to wait a bit longer before I start trashing their offense. I'm curious what Detroit looks like against other offenses. If they shut down everybody, then we're not worrying about it. So the Bucs still can't score against functional defenses at a high level, then there's some cause for concern. Speaking of scoring against functional or seemingly functional defenses, the Arizona Cardinals lit up the Rams. Marvin Harrison Jr. arrived. 2 touchdowns in his first 2 catches. Kyler Murray realized, hey, it is my job to get this guy the ball, and got him the ball. They torched the Rams. It was over in the first half, particularly since the Rams just kept breaking down. We know half their offensive line's gone. We know Puka Nakua's gone. Now Cooper Kupp's gone. Their backfield's banged up. Their defense is banged up. It's looking mighty over. And I want to say good things about the Cards. I predicted they'd win. I predicted they'd run the ball on the ground, which they did very well. Over 200 rushing yards, I believe. James Conner, masterclass behind that Cardinals O-line. But this game to me is much more of a, okay, time to abandon ship on LA than it is to jump on the Cardinals hype train. The Rams look cooked. I don't see a path to the playoffs for them anymore. When they're this beat up, when they're missing their 2 biggest offensive stars, when they're missing their O-line, when they can't move the ball effectively despite having a good quarterback and a great offensive mind, I think it's over. What is the future for the Rams? Everyone miraculously gets healthy by week 4 and they go on a run? It's done. This season is not meant to be for LA. It might be time for Stafford to retire. Go enjoy your time with your lovely wife who cheated on you in college and get on with your professional commentating career. It's over.
Well, I know this victory has a massive asterisk next to it for the Cardinals because of all the injuries the Rams had.
I don't think they care too much about that. This is a Michigan National Championship situation. The banner's still going up.
And the Rams, I do think they're kind of cooked with all the injuries they've sustained. When you lose half your offensive line, you lose your number 1 receiver heading into the season. You lose your receiver who's had a close to 2,000-yard season in the past in Cooper Kupp, who's now banged up with an ankle injury, and you don't have much else after that, and you have a very young defense. It is going to be hard to win football games. But from a Cardinals perspective, they proved once again they are not going anywhere, and they're either going to beat the brakes off you or hang with you the entire game. They were very close to beating a much more experienced Bills team in week 1. And then in week 2, they carried the momentum that they built. They got Marvin Harrison Jr. involved in the game plan, and they put up points. Kyler Murray, he's proving once again why he was once the number 1 overall pick in the draft. His ability to scramble behind the offensive line, make plays behind the line, and then throw the ball downfield. No one else does it better than him. Maybe Russell Wilson 8 years ago was able to do it like Kyler Murray does.
Well, there's this guy in Kansas City. He also wears red. You may have heard of him. He was pretty good behind the line of scrimmage.
He's all right.
It's all right, all right.
But very encouraging if you're a Cardinals fan. I think next week, playing the Lions, that is an extremely intriguing game because it's the Lions team that's struggling to get the ball in the end zone, and you have a Cardinals team that is very young, very well coached on the defensive side of the ball with Jonathan Gannon. And if the Lions once again struggle to get the ball in the end zone, aren't functioning at the high level we think they can, this Cardinals team is going to catch them. Marvin Harrison Jr. may have another 2 touchdowns, and they'll win that game.
I'm not so optimistic about their passing attack going into that game, and the Lions, last year, very good run defense, upgraded it by getting DJ Reader. So I don't see them matching up well against the Lions team. If their defense steps up, it'll certainly be a competitive game. But worth noting, losing to Josh Allen in week 1 after he just lights you on fire in the second half and scores 4 touchdowns, that might not be that much of an indictment on the defense. After what he did to Miami, Josh Allen might just be able to do that in general. He was pulling his punches in the second half, still looked very good against the Fins. The Cardinals might have a legit defense. On the level of a team like the 49ers, maybe not. Maybe not the best in their own division. But if they can keep them in games, not get shocked and awed, they will be a playoff team this year. We are seeing a lot of teams who we had low expectations of in general rise to the occasion. Seeing the Saints look really good through 2 weeks. Cardinals look great through 2 weeks. Vikings look great through 2 weeks. The NFC might be loaded. We know the AFC is top heavy with the Chiefs and whoever else you want to put up there from the AFC North and Buffalo. The AFC might be the better conference.
The NFC, you mean?
NFC, thank you. The NFC might be the better conference right now, thanks to all the talented teams coming out of nowhere and shocking the world early on.
Well, we didn't think the Cardinals were going to be atrocious. We just didn't expect them to take the leap that they had.
Did you say they were going to win 7 games?
That's not atrocious.
Not good. We'll have to go, someone go fact check the record prediction.
I did say 7 games.
In closing, I would like to comment on one player who should serve as an example for all those young kids out there aspiring to greatness. Do not be like Justin Tucker. Do not forget your station, your position, who you are. Justin Tucker was the consensus best kicker in football. People were putting him in Adam Vinatieri conversations a few years ago. But what does he do? He forgets his station. He forgets, oh wait, I'm an idiot kicker. I may have hit the longest kick in NFL history. I'm still an idiot kicker. It's still a wonder people know my name. He went on social media. He started running his mouth. He started trying to be swaggy. What has happened? He is 0 for 2 on 50-yarders. He is 1 for 8 on 50-yarders dating back into 2023. He has not been an elite kicker. He's not been a good kicker. The rest of the NFL has figured out to bang the 50-yarder in effortlessly. 31 for 38 on the season outside of Justin Tucker. Tucker is dragging that average down. He is becoming a liability for the Ravens. He is not good, and that has happened because he decided to run his mouth and forget he was an idiot kicker. He has gotten in his own head, and as a kicker, destroyed himself.
That has been our week 2 reactions. Let us know what you think down in the comments below. Will Caleb Williams figure it out this season? When will Caleb Williams figure it out? Use code Thicc on Underdog. You can get a deposit match up to $1,000. Like the video, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.